The 70 Sevens. Isaiah 61. The year of the Lord's favor. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Strangers will shepherd your flocks, foreigners will work your fields and vineyards, and you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And so you will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. In my faithfulness I will reward my people and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are a people the Lord has blessed. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness, as a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. For as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out indicating that something was changed. For that jinn started murmuring with accusations against Daniel, to which something was then decreed. 77s are decreed for your people. This could mean the literal 70 weeks or 70 periods, in which 7 would be a prominent number, either days or years. His people are warned to revert from their transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. They were essentially tasked with settling for a prayer and pilgrimage direction. Daniel was in the Babylonian exile, and therefore God wanted the Jews to unify their ideals and faith traditions upon a single matter, of which would be the most holy place for them. It was at a time when the Jews were in dire need of God, thinking that they were taken away from God by being enslaved outside of Jerusalem, that they were unjustly prevented from performing a ritual they were commanded by God to perform, pilgrimage to the holy city. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many of 1/7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens, making it a total of 69 sevens. It can be seen as a period of 69 weeks, or 69 years, or 69 reigns. That until the Anointed One comes, there will be 69 reigns of sevens, indicating priestly or godly reigns. The Anointed One's ministry would be the culmination of those 69 sevens with a final 7, or a reign of 7 days or 7 years. It was during the time of Joseph that the king of Egypt had a dream about 7 fat cows and 7 other cows, 7 green wheat grains and 7 dry wheat grains. It seems as though the concept of a periodicity for Jews has become the concept of sevens, that they reached the point where they associated the number 7 with God because it would pertain to periodic occurrences. It seems as though the number 7 is made into a sign for them that they would perceive to be akin to a sign, or equivalent to the notion of evidence that a vision is from God. The Anointed One would be put to death with nothing, or what the rabbis would describe as no benefit from the material world. He would die for nothing, or die and have no one, or die but not for himself, which happens in most cases when death happens for the same or a greater good we call Allah. If the Anointed One was put to the final reign of the 77s, then it has to have been in a lineage that had prophecy but was not allowed rulership. He would be put to death by those who persecute him for no sin of his own, in a similar manner to persecution of believers on the basis of their belief. Ethical cleansing and mass genocide against a specific faith tradition is called prosecution. Therefore, the Anointed One will be prosecuted by the community and put to death on false allegations of blasphemy or disbelief, despite these signs not having been committed by him. False testimony is thus most often punishable by all religious doctrines. Whether the Anointed One would build the sanctuary before he is put to death, rebuilt the temple or not, is debatable, but it says that the people of the ruler will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. It would come as no surprise if his people were originally against the decree of rebuilding the temple or the sanctuary, and thus would wage war to destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. When this line is mentioned by an angel who had witnessed firsthand the flood of Noah, it would be akin to being told that the world will be devastated by a flood that is similar to the flood of Noah. War will continue until the end, would mean that it would cause war to break out between people until the end of time, with desolations that have been decreed, or woes, as the book of Revelation describes them. Believers are required by Islam to know the Anointed One, or the Imam of their time. It is no wonder that Imam was a title given to Abraham because he was an elected prophet of God to become his friend. Anointed One thus means Imam, elected, chosen one, Messiah, Savior of ignorance, anointed with oil, etc. More interpretations or titles are provided to such a figure by God Himself. It is why God is the one who anoints, selects, elects, and sanctifies His people. The abomination that causes desolation is therefore an abominable act, a transgression, or a misinterpreted doctrine, which causes people to feel the emptiness and the nothingness caused by faith leaving them. Like this desolation is a state which the world will have to be turned into as a payback for the sacrifice that the Anointed One had made. It is not unfathomable that the Anointed One of the time would have had to sacrifice himself for the sake of a greater good, but he would ultimately be given nothing, as though his self-sacrifice has amounted to nothing in the world around him. As though he is sacrificing his life to defend the lives of people around him and those whom he was sent to guide. Yet, upon making such a sacrifice, he is still rewarded with nothingness. He would be put to death for nothing, or put to death having no one at the end of his life, no one to mourn his death, no one to look upon when his soul leaves his body, no one he would call a friend from among the people who have seen and met him. It sounds as a tragic world that he would be leaving, a world which cares not to shed a tear for his departure, or would rather have had him never to have been sent to them than to have to endure following his advice and commands. It would be such a miserable form of world that the Anointed One has to rule, a world which will give him nothing at the end, would give him no tangible benefit and possibly no reward in his life to come. It is as though the Anointed One would have only become ruler out of duty, knowing that it is not beneficial to him in either ends. His rulership would be devoid of personal gains, whether in the current world or the next world, whether in this aeon or the next aeon, whether in this life or the next, or this seven and the last seven. It is no wonder that if someone is predestined to become an anointed one, they would immediately consider the just conception of this verse, that rulers are selected and elected by God to rule over a people, and therefore are driven by duty to rule rather than desire for the earthly benefits of such a reign. The just philosopher is a concept that Plato introduced in his book when comparing utopia to a dystopia caused by tyranny and the tyrant ruler. It is not always a dichotomy between good and evil, but also morality and whether the scales of justice would value knowledge and philosophy, duty, honor, and dignity more than it would value power and tyranny. A tyrannical ruler would only be opposed by God rather than anointed and selected. God does not let tyrants rain corruption against the people unless they truly deserve said punishment. It is not until the Jews started practicing idolatry that God sent them Nebuchadnezzar to destroy the temple. God is a jealous God who does not like when others are worshipped instead of Him in His own house of worship, which was dedicated and consecrated to Him by one of His beloved elect prophets. It was its own abomination of desolation when people started showing off their wealth and praising wealth rather than God. When instead of worshipping the golden calf, they started inventing more and more golden statues to which they offered worship and reverence instead of God. It is not only by saying, "This is my God," that a person would be worshipping the thing they are pointing to. It is rather by holding it in high or equal standards with what one identifies with holiness and God. We fundraise for charity because that is how we attain piety, and that is how we attain praiseworthiness in the eyes of the Lord. Well, if you do exactly that, fundraise for charity, do it specifically for charity, where you would actually make everything 100% exclusively dedicated to charity, then that would sure help you attain piety. However, if you make a split saying that 50% would be for charity and 50% would be my pocket money or which you would use for vain desires, then that is an effect of polytheistic influences. You are not essentially associating a partner with God, but you are promising to do something holy for the pursuit of good for humanity and others, while later going back on your word and making your promise subject to other factors, like greed and other deadly sins. If the reward for something good is known and widely understood and introduced as nothing or having no one upon being put to death, this good that is being performed is sought from the perspective of duty that is ungoverned by anything human. A good that is sought not for the satisfaction of the society which is being ultimately saved from their emptiness, but rather for the sake of honor and duty. It is one thing to recognize an act as a duty and therefore plan to implement it the best way a duty is conducted, and to firmly believe that it is a duty which will one day become a lifestyle and an actualized reality. It is one thing to be born to receive the rulership of a kingdom, and another to be born hoping for reign and working towards it. It is one thing to have your whole life purpose be planned for you by a superior entity, and another thing to go through life trying to figure out your life purpose, or your meaning of life, or the why for was I created answer. If God does elect someone to have such a duty as the duty of the Anointed One, then He can also unelect him upon His will. It is as easy as determining whether he is fit or unfit for such a responsibility, since he would have nothing upon being put to death. Then it is as though God is saying He will make him blameless who would be put to death sinless, not only in the eyes of the people around him, but also in the eyes of God. The crown of righteousness is a far better graceful reward from God than the material crown of kingship. It is not for kingdom and earthly glory that an anointed one would ever be anointed by God. It is for piety and for a held unto promise of paradise in the hereafter.